make sure everyone can get home within a reasonable time. There he is, the enforcer. He comes bringing fury. How you doing, young man? All right. We ready? Okay. Inshallah, we'll begin. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we are at Saturday, the 3rd of Ramadan, 1444. Today, inshallah, we are looking to take a look through our series that we do in Ramadan of different small kutub or mutun. For this Ramadan, I would like to go through the book which in Arabic is entitled Al-Hajj Muhassal fi Manaqib al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. The purified pearl in the virtues of the Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. I've translated this in English as The Life and Times of Ahmad ibn Hanbal because it's keeping in mind with all the other kutub that we've done thus far. Life and Times of Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani, Life and Times of Abu Umar al-Maqdisi. Now, why have I chosen this? I've chosen this because when we looked at the Life and Times of Abu Umar al-Maqdisi and the Life and Times of Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahimahumullah, the whole thing of why these men were noble was because of their adherence to the first three generations, which is we mentioned in Hadith, Sahih Muslim and others, the best generation is my generation, and those who come next, and those who come next. So what I wanted to do is to now go reach back into the first three generations and to say this is the model that they were basing their lives on. And the closest of the first three generations was the ending of them, which was the third, which is Imam Ahmad. So I chose to take that, and also because that kitab I was most familiar with out of all the other books. There are kutub on the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, radiallahu anhu, on Imam Malik, radiallahu anhu, on Imam Shafi'i, radiallahu anhu. But those I'm not as familiar with because I did not read those books as reference and I didn't go through them in Mahaj al-Reverie. But this book I'm most familiar with. So it's not because of any shortcoming I found in the other imams or anything such as this that I haven't done them. It's merely because it's what I'm familiar with. Right? There is another kitab that is known as The Lives of the Four Imams, which was written by Imam Abdul Hadi, who died 722 Hijri. But that one was a longer book because it actually lists all of the sheikhs of all the imams. And Imam Ahmad had 1,500 teachers, and Imam Abdul Hadi actually names all of them. Imam Hanifa, every single last teacher. That's a much more involved book. For that's something that goes outside of Ramadan's kitab in terms of trying to give concise, inspiring books that occupy your mind in Ramadan but aren't too imposing, because after all, we are fasting. So that's why I chose not to do that book in Ramadan. But perhaps outside of Ramadan, that could be something that we've done. Now, what is Al-Jawhar al-Muhassal, or the Life and Times of Ahmad ibn Hanbal? What is that based upon? So before we talk about the author, we want to talk about why have we chosen that book and what's it based on. This is a very good question. The Life and Times of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, or in Arabic, Al-Jawhar al-Muhassal fi Manaqib al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. This book is based upon the following sources. The first is Siratul Imam, which is the life of the Imam, by Imam Salih al-Baghdadi. He is the eldest son of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So this is an eyewitness account. The next is Dhikrul Mihna, the remembering the Inquisition. Remembering the Inquisition. This is by Hanbal ibn Ishaq al-Shaybani, who is also from the family of Imam Ahmad. The next book that I've also based this on is the Masail of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. The Masail is based upon, it's not just the rulings of the Imam, but it's his day-to-day affairs. It's his day-to-day affairs. So these are dealing with his life. We have Ibn Mashkawayh al-Hamadani. Ibn Mashkawayh al-Hamadani. Ibn Mashkawayh al-Hamadani was one of the witnesses to the Inquisition. So these are all eyewitness accounts. So Siratul Imam by Salih al-Baghdadi, the Masail of the Imam by Abdullah, which is his son, Dhikrul Mihna by Hanbal ibn Ishaq, right? Siratul Imam, which we discussed. And then we have another book that comes after. So now we're talking, so we've discussed primary sources. Now we're going to discuss secondary sources. Secondary source is Manaqib al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. This is a secondary source. This is written by Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, who died 597 of the Hijri. Now, as a secondary source, he learned from students of students of students of Imam Ahmad. So he's now taking from all of the eyewitness literature, and then he's also taking from another important figure, a chronicler, who is Abu al-Hussein al-Baghdadi. Abu al-Hussein al-Baghdadi died 526 Hijri. He is the author of the famous manual, Tabaqat al-Hanabila, the generations of Hanbali scholars. So he's borrowing from that, he's taking from the eyewitness account literature, and he's putting it all into the book Manaqib al-Imam. There's also another book that Imam Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah takes from, which is written by Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi. Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi wrote a book called Al-Manaqib as well. Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi is the famous Shafi'i muhaddith rahimahullah. He wrote a Manaqib book as well. So he took all of this literature and put it in Al-Manaqib. Al-Manaqib is a large work. Most print houses have it 2 volumes. It's a large work because you're gathering between all this data. But even with that, it wasn't as large as it could have been, because when you look at the eyewitness account literature, Siratul Imam is 1 fist thick volume. Dhikrul Mihna is half a fist volume. When you look at Mishkawayh and others, they're of similar size. So then the decision was made on what he wanted to include for the Manaqib. The author of Al-Jawhar al-Muhassal took all of the previous literature and decided to simplify it for a wide audience. So a smaller text of this size for a simpler audience. Now, what was his methodology? Imam Sa'di's methodology was the unit headings. The unit headings are all based on Ibn al-Jawzi's Manaqib. All the unit headings. Says, okay, the unit headings are going to be based because Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah is a fantastic chronicler. So he's based the unit headings all on the Manaqib. I'll use the unit headings. Then after the unit headings, he took all of the agreed upon statements that we have about the Imam in each way possible and has included them. So what everyone's agreed upon and the most important things that are agreed upon, the Imam has included in this text. In addition to that, he has decided to only include a small amount of poetry, because the literature before included huge amounts of poetry, because Imam Ahmad had a lot of poetry on memorizing things. Other Imams had poetry on memorizing things. He's tried to reduce huge amounts of poetry. So the layout of the book gives us 17 units. So the layout of Imam Sa'di's kitab gives us 17 units. Built upon the framework of Imam al-Jawzi's Manaqib, and including eyewitness accounts. Now, what the Imam has done is, in addition to discussing the life of the Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah, in addition to discussing that, he also gives eyewitness information into the circumstances around his life, who the Khalifas were in his time, what the political circumstances in his time. He has chosen not to include the Imam's day-to-day affairs, such as what he ate on a daily basis, because Imam Salih, Abdullah, and others included what he ate, what he regularly dressed in, things like this. He's chosen not to include those things. But his physical description and the simplicity of his eating, he included that, but not the actual day-to-day for his entire life. He's not included that. As a parental advisory warning, and I'm glad we're doing this in Ramadan, he goes into, out of all the smaller books, he decides to cite the lengthiest literature about the Inquisition. I have to warn you and inform you, the sections under the Inquisition are very gory. There are narratives of beheadings, people being sectioned in one half, in two halves. We're going to have to learn the names of torture devices that were used back then, and they're the same torture devices that are used today by the Americans. Because tyrants, although they're different people, they all share things in common. The Babylonians, the Abbasids, the Americans, right? The Tatar, the Russians. What they all have in common is tyrants share similar things in common. Although they're different people, they follow a line. So I give this parental discretion to you that the sections, and I will let you know as we get closer to the sections that deal with the Inquisition, these will be very gory. And there will be listings mentioned where people lose their lives. People are crucified. People are some of the greatest scholars of this ummah. You hear about them being put in ditches, burnt beyond recognition, tortured until their bodies give out. You need to understand this. And the reason why you need to understand this is that you understand what happened with the 72 sects. Why it was so important, the stand that was taken by Imam Ahmad, and why surrender, it's just not an option when it comes to these things. You will get to see a first-hand view of what ecumenism means. Because what ecumenism or secularism, we just want to get along with everyone. We want to have everyone has an equal voice. That equal voice equals violence. We as Muslims, when people say you need to allow greater religious diversity and greater political freedom, we know what political freedom looks like, and it's the Inquisition. We know what it looks like. This is the first inquisition the Muslims would suffer. The second would be in Andalus, which we ultimately wound up winning that one by 1826. And we now face the tribulation of the Tatars of this era, and we're beating them, and we will beat them, the same as we beat all the other ones. But you must understand this first inquisition, because this first inquisition involved Muslims that had strayed from the straight path and have now picked up the sword, have decided they're going to defend themselves with it, and if you do not follow this, then we're going to kill you and torture you, starting with the scholars. So as we go through the Inquisition and you start seeing the names of the biographies, and again, the biographies will be lengthy, and I don't apologize for that, because it's important that you know the inheritance that's been given to you, not just of Imam Ahmad, but of all the other imams that were in his time, including even those who lost their nerve, which Imam al-Jawzi rahimahullah lists them with deep detail. Because we need to know them as well, because every time one of them lost their nerve, it made it harder for the rest of the scholars to have to deal with it. Imam Ahmad said of the 7 that lost their nerve and capitulated, he said, they're like a crack in a wall that allowed a door to get open. Had they not done that, this man, referring to the Khalifa, he would have left us alone. And every time he recounted that incident, he would shake his head in disgust. And that's the same attitude we should have. Maybe their names you might know, you might like them. I don't care. Because this is the reality. The sacrifices made by these people far outweighs anything I could put into words today. But I have to warn you that those sections on the Inquisition will be brutal. So I want you to understand that ahead of time. That's why I'm happy we're not doing this outside of Ramadan, because I'd have to give brothers warnings about in terms of like concerns of whether brothers might feel sick to their stomach or might throw up, because it is that serious. The chapters are that graphic. I now want to change gears from that, and I want to discuss the 5 things of why this book stands out outside of other literature on the topic. 5 reasons why Imam Sa'di's book stands out from other literature on the topic. I didn't say better, I said stands out. Number 1, its brevity. Its brevity. It stands out because it's brief. The other literature on the life of Imam Ahmad goes into painstaking detail. We know more about Imam Ahmad than we do about Tony Blair. And we share the same time period with him. We know more about Imam Ahmad than we know about Abraham Lincoln. We know more about Imam Ahmad than we know about the last governor over America. That's the level of detail that there is about him. What he ate, where he was born, how he was born, whether he was a breech birth or not. Like, we have an immense amount of information about this man. How concise the text is useful, because for those that want to read in detail, you have to delve into detail. This text is brief enough to where someone can get a good picture of the Imam's life and at the same time have not an encyclopedic understanding, but enough to where if he wants to do more, then he will do what's necessary to parse the literature and such. The second thing of the standout is the amount of quotes that As-Sa'di gives of people who knew the Imam. The amount of quotes of people that knew the Imam personally. He leans heavily on people that knew him personally, teachers and students. Number three, minimalization of the poetry. Minimalization of the poetry. Now, as a group of people, Arabs, we're a people of poetry. That's our background. We're a people of poetry and spirited poetry. But that's not the same for every culture. English people are a people of theater. It's why Arab acting is terrible. Not because we don't know how to, but we're not a people of theater. We're a people of poetry. So those of you that may have seen the dub over of the Omar series, you do know that more than a third of it was removed for the dub over. Why? Because much of it was Omar and other narratives about him reflecting on his past and other things like that, which is poetic. The Arabs love that. But for an English-speaking audience, those areas had to be shaved to do what? To allow more action. Why? For who? For a people who enjoy theater. That's why you don't have a huge action theater base in the Arab world. You don't have action movie after action movie after action movie. It's not there. Even a knockoff movie the Arabs tried to do of The Godfather. I won't bother brothers today to fast. It's one of the most terrible things that have been done. Why? Because theater's not their thing. Now this Imam, his background as an Arab, he understood that to a wider audience, some of them might not be Arab, so their background won't be poetry. So some of the poetry that's from the Manaqib ibn al-Jawzi and others, he took that out and only included some sections. So the minimalization of the poetry. Number four is emphasis on the primacy of the first three generations. Emphasis on the primacy of the first three generations and the importance of adherence to them. Primacy of the first three generations and the importance of adherence to them. If this book teaches us nothing else, it teaches us that. What I've been saying for years and continue to say for years, there is no better generation than those three. Adherence to that and dogged, stubborn adherence to that is a means towards every good. And deviating from that, one handspan, is what's going to get you destroyed. Because when the Rasulullah said, the best generation is my generation, those who come next, all scholars, no matter where they come from and what madhab they are agreed that those are absolute statements. They're absolute statements. So while Imam al-Ghazali may be greater in knowledge than Amr, the Sahabi who dug the ditch and we know nothing about him other than the fact that he dug the ditch and he died breaking his neck, he's not greater than him in rank. Amr is still greater than Abu Hamid al-Ghazali in rank. Although Abu Hamid al-Ghazali might be greater than him in knowledge. And that's something that has to be considered. The fifth thing that sets this book apart is the timing of the book being written. The timing of it being written. This book was written upon completion of the yearly read-through of the Musnad. The yearly read-through of the Musnad that a Sa'di used to do. The Musnad of Imam Ahmad. They do a yearly read-through of the Musnad. Upon completion of that, in a crowded room, they asked him, is there a smaller book that we can go through? So that every time we finish the Musnad, we can read this as a way of tabarruk and a way of blessing. So they would finish the Musnad, then read this, and it was like a sweetening of the Khatam of the Musnad. It's like a sweetening of it. And so this book, Al-Jawhar al-Muhassal, came out of that. That's the reason that was written. So the timing of the book is very useful, because it's something that is generally written. It was something that was written at that time. We looked into the life of Imam Ahmad upon the study of Al-Jami' al-Saghir fi Ahadith al-Bashir al-Nadhir by Imam al-Suyuti, which is a condensing of the Musnad and other books. So, understanding how this book stands out, now I want to talk about the author of the book. The author of the book, and this biography is from Imam al-Makki's As-Suhub al-Wabila. Imam Muhammad ibn Humayd al-Makki, he said the following about Imam al-Sa'di. He said, Imam al-Sa'di is Muhammad, the son of Muhammad, the son of Abu Bakr, the son of Yazid, the son of Khalid, Al-Badr, Al-Badarshi, who was born in Cairo, northern Egypt. He's the grandson of Al-Qadi Nuruddin al-Buwaiti. He's the grandson of Al-Qadi Nuruddin al-Buwaiti. As-Sa'di's mother's name is Amina. And As-Sa'di is in reference to the Banu Sa'ad, which are the tribe that took in the Rasul alayhi salatu wassalam, and when he was sent out by Amina to them. It's interesting, his mother's name is Amina, and the Sa'di's name is Muhammad, and he's from the Sa'di clan. Also consider another famous Sa'di on his father's side is one of the big Imams of our era, Imam Ismail ibn Badran, Hafidhahullah, the great doom in Maraja. He is also from the Bani Sa'ad on his father's side. Right? And the relation between Ismail ibn Badran and the Shami family, who's Ibn Bubis, there's a relationship between them because they're connected patrilineal to him from the Bani Sa'ada. And the Bani Sa'ad is also related. There's a relation between them and Abdul Qadir ibn Badran al-Dumi, rahimahullah, died 1346, who we're familiar with him. He's been mentioned countless times. Right? Now, in terms of where he was born, the Imam As-Sa'di was born on the 3rd of Shawwal in the year 832. 3rd of Shawwal in the year 832, next to Madrasa al-Bulqini. Madrasa al-Bulqini. Madrasa al-Bulqini is a madrasa of the late hadith scholar al-Bulqini, and many hadith scholars have come out of this madrasa. I'm unsure whether it's still running. It might be. As-Sa'di's father died while he was only 3 years old. So this made him an orphan. He was then looked after by his mother and his grandmother. In his adolescent years, he started by memorizing the Quran. So, 11 years old, he completes the Quran. Okay? Upon finishing that, he memorizes Ad-Dujayli's Al-Wajiz in fiqh. He memorizes Al-Dujayli Al-Wajiz. So, Ad-Dujayli died 732. His Al-Wajiz, and this is an important point for those that study fiqh. Al-Wajiz was used as the outline when Imam Musa al-Hajjawi wrote Zad al-Mustaqni'. He used the outline of Al-Wajiz as the framework for the chapters, which is why Zad al-Mustaqni' differs from the original book is based on in some 33 matters. Comes from the ijtihad of the summarizer, and also the fact that he built it on Ad-Dujayli's Al-Wajiz, which Imam al-Buhuti rahimahullah in his Rawd al-Murbi' discusses this in painstaking detail. Okay. Why this happened, how it makes the text stand out. Okay. Imam al-Sa'di goes on to memorize the Alfiya in grammar, which is several hundred lines. He studies usul al-fiqh, and he memorizes Al-Juwayni's Al-Talkhis. He memorizes Al-Juwayni's Al-Talkhis. We're just talking about what he's memorized. He memorizes As-Subki's Jami' al-Jawami'. But he's not content to just do that. He wants to also master the field in the sciences of the Quran. So he studies under Az-Zayn Ja'far al-Shanhuri. He studies the mastery of Tajweed and the different qira'at. So this brings him to Qalun and Warsh, which is both through Nafi', which is, we can tell through this kitab that that's what he read as his regular habit. He learned grammar from Al-Ubbadi, Al-Ra'i, and Al-Nuwayri. He went through other commentary literature, and after a period of time, had the opportunity to learn from the Imam Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam al-Baghdadi. Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam al-Baghdadi. Now, understand this Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam al-Baghdadi is different to the one who's called Sultan al-Ulama. That's Izzuddin ibn Abdus Salam. He's a Shafi'i. This one, Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam al-Baghdadi, this is a Hanafi. This is a big Hanafi imam. Okay? He studied from him recitation of the Quran, grammar, and other things. Then As-Sa'di also met Taqiyuddin al-Husni for usul al-fiqh, for creed, and different sciences of grammar. He also learned usul al-fiqh again through Kafiyaji and other imams of Egypt. He learned inheritance, math, and astronomy from Ibn al-Majdi and Ibn Shihab al-Sijini. Now this is important. During this time, the 880s Hijri, close to 900, there was a process going on in Egypt called the Great Simplification Process. The Great Simplification Process. During this time, huge books, monster-sized commentaries were being taken and shrunk down into memorizable mutun. So during this time, all of this, Egypt was pushing towards this. Imam al-Suyuti is pushing towards this in his time because he's in the 900s. Imam al-Hajjawi summarizes the Zad during the 900s. Books of creed, fiqh, ihsan, all of these things start to be shrunk down into rhyming texts during this time. Why? Because they're seeing that people's attention to detail isn't the same. So in order to be able to carry a lot in a little bit, they shrink things down. And other books are built around this process. So Imam al-Sa'di, in writing Al-Jawhar al-Muhassal, inadvertently has taken part in this process. He learns from al-Naqash, al-Hijazi, al-Sa'igh, studying calligraphy and the sciences that have to do with handwriting. Because at this time, if you wanted to be able to write books and things like this, your handwriting had to be sharp to actually, because there's a certain way that they teach al-huruf, al-harf awalan, wal-harakat thaniyan. No, it says al-harf awalan, wal-nuqat thaniyan, wal-harakat akhiran. This is how we were taught. They tell you, write the letter first, then the dots come second, and lastly you put the harakat. That's what's taught into you. And the length of the letter, like a calf, the length of the top and then the side, there's a certain length, and you're taught that over and over and over and over again. And it was an annoyance for my kids, like it was an annoyance for me. But you were taught it over and over and over again, to where I can just write a calf and it'll look the same all the time. There's like very little variation, because it's something you're taught. Like they'll say the point between the top of the calf and the bottom, its foot, should be the same length all the time, right? And that's what was beaten into us. How the meme looks, the exact triangle of the meme in the top, how it looks at the beginning, how it's supposed to look, how the sawd, like there's an entire principle of what's known as khat for writing down the Quran, but then writing all together. And there's people, so when manuscripts are handed down, they're looking at handwritten documents, right? So like this is an example of handwritten document. But even those that aren't masters of Arabic language can make out the wording because his handwriting's clear. And a compliment that used to be said of people who were outstanding, they used to say he had good handwriting, meaning that he represented his handwriting. And so if you could not write properly in Arabic, you were seen as illiterate. You're not literate. So then he learns from Ibn al-Nasaba, al-Qalqashandi, al-Bulqini, al-Uqsara'i, which Uqsur is in South Egypt. He learns from Ibn al-Faqus, and he also learns calculus. During this time, he also learns hadith terminology, and he goes through the 6 collections. The final of those 6, he learns from Sarah bin Jama'ah in Cairo, right, who was a famous female hadith scholar. He learns from her. He then heads to Mecca. So he makes Hajj in Mecca. And he studies fiqh there and says, while I'm here, once I finish Hajj, why don't I also study some ilm? So when he finishes his Hajj, he also starts to study ilm there. What used to happen, and it still does, but not to the same degree, is when people would go on Hajj, that was a year's journey. Not just the travel there, but also being there. So someone might be in Mecca. He takes all that time to get there. Then he stays there for weeks and weeks and years. He stays there. When I went on Hajj, there was a Muslim brother I met who was Maliki. And he came from the US. And I said, how long have you been studying Maliki fiqh? He said, about 4 years. I said, wow, subhanAllah, when did you come here? He said, I made Hajj and I've not left since. I said, mashallah. I said, do you worry? He said, do you worry about them looking for you? He said, listen, as long as nobody says anything, I should be fine. He said, but it's not like I live near the embassy. I'm here to study fiqh. So he's studying his Maliki fiqh in Al-Madinah. I said, all right, what kutub are you doing? So he starts breaking down the kutub and everything else. So we're comparing notes about, okay, well, our elementary kutub is this, your elementary kutub is that, mid-level, this is, so we start talking. But there are still people that do it. But it's a little bit more personal risk, because now you have to start dealing with things of immigration law, and if we catch you, get kicked out for 5 years before you can come. All these other matters that you have to deal with. But people still risk it. They still risk it. Now, the Imam goes on to go back to Cairo, and he studies with Al-Izz al-Kinani in fiqh, and also tafsir. And then after this, he begins the process of research. And in researching, he starts writing books. The Imam comes into contact with none other than Alauddin al-Mardawi, Ali ibn Sulaiman, rahimahullah wa rada, the great Marja, who died 885 Hijri. He's the writer of Al-Insaf, At-Tanqih, countless other kutub. He comes into his presence, the great Palestinian Imam, and he has the opportunity to learn some of his ilm. He sits with him, he learns. After this, he goes on a teaching exercise where he is teaching his kutub, he is teaching the different collections, and his day is filled with teaching. Filled with teaching. So in the morning, he's teaching hifz of Quran and other mutun. In the afternoon, he is teaching people the hadith of the sihah, and in later days, he's teaching handwriting and tajweed. So his day is full. Because of the work that he was doing and his popularity, he comes to the attention of his local government in Egypt. And so during this time, now pressure starts to get put on him, because at this time, the Ottomans are now entering into their strength phase. They're entering into their strength phase. So as they start to devour areas around the Mediterranean, they try to impose their way of ruling on the rest of the areas, which Egypt had been Abbasid, although loosely Abbasid. And Egypt's policy from Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi was to do what? To have qadis from all the four schools in the minarets. This is why one of Cairo's names is the city of 1,000 minarets, because in every minara was a faqih teaching. It's not like that today. Maybe a quarter, even if it's a third that. That's still massive. But nonetheless, as Sa'di is there, the Ottomans, they come in and say things aren't running like they were before. And they try to replace all of the qadis with just Hanafi qadis. So they depose all the qadis, Malikis, all the qadis. But the problem with that is other scholars aren't pleased with that, because it's not just, they're going to put Hanafis in. No. Our Hanafi scholars in particular. So the Egyptian native raised Hanafi scholars are deposed. So massive tribulation happens. But there are huge demonstrations. And after these huge demonstrations and protests, the Imam gets put back in his post. He's minding his business. But even though he's back in his post, he has to deal with the local governors. And the Ottomans are constantly agitating against him, saying, you should follow the Ottoman, because by this time they haven't codified the Ottoman law, but they have a working framework that they're trying to impose on the Mediterranean and the rest of the areas around them, which would reach its apex in Suleiman al-Qanuni, who in English is called the Magnificent for some reason. But he's known as the lawmaker because of the insistence on imposing law. So if people have a romantic opinion about the Ottomans, I'm sorry. But we have to be honest. There was a tension between the scholars and the Ottomans, like the rest of the tyrants. So you're saying all the Ottomans are tyrants? No, but I'm saying these ones. Just like the Abbasids, these ones. Just like the Bani Umayyad, these ones. Yes. So the Imam goes back to his post and teaches people. And he remains independent of the judiciary for 26 years and 35 days. 26 years and 35 days, independent of the judiciary and all their tribulation. He gave judgment directly from the office of judiciary and was independent for 40 years. So it goes to show you don't have to have the government in your back pocket, or you be in their back pocket. 40 years. He taught with praiseworthy manners and goodness. And he died suddenly on Tuesday night, the 13th of Dhul Qa'dah, 902 Hijri. He died Tuesday night, 13th of Dhul-Qa'dah, in the year 902 Hijri. Al-Ulaymi mentions his rank, and so do others. His rank was so beloved. Now, he dies on the 13th of Dhul-Qa'dah. They did Salat al-Janazah bil-Ghaib for him because of their love for him in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa on Friday, the 21st of Dhul-Qa'dah. 7 days later, they did Salat al-Janazah bil-Ghaib because of their love for him. The one who took over after As-Sa'di was Imam Shihab ad-Din Ash-Shishini. The Imam left behind a wide body of books, 5 books. A book on how to discharge Hajj, basic grammar book, basic fiqh book, which was widely based on Al-Mardawi, because Al-Mardawi was the champion at that point. And then this book, on Jarh al-Muhassal. Okay? Our mission then, inshallah, in this Ramadan will be to complete this book. So we'll be starting, inshallah, in earnest from the next week, and we have 3 Saturdays to complete. I would say as a recommendation, to, as I said, to steel yourselves for the sections on the Inquisition. Steel your heart, because there's much that you will read that will trouble you. Because the people doing this, they were khulafa, doing this to the scholars. And we all know the Abbasids are related to Rasulullah. We know that. But when the same people destroy the grave of Al-Hussein because they say it looks better than my palace, and they do all these other things, don't have any illusions. Tyranny exists in every framework of human life. The only people that are infallible are the prophets, alayhim salam. That's it. No one else doesn't commit sin. Of the human race, the only one pure from the stain of sin are prophets. And that's what this exercise should teach you. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم استغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم حميد رحيم. So inshallah, we will be looking to prepare ourselves for next week. I will not bother to go through the charade of terrorizing brothers if they have fear of reading or what have you. Rather than do that, because you want to miss out on barakah and not get any, alhamdulillah, that's fine. I'm perfectly fine with that. But for those who are interested in barakah, they can put their name forward if they want to read. Okay, we have Brother Rashid. He's reading next week. We have Brother Kashif. He's reading the week after. And we have a third face. We don't want a third face. Okay, Brother Jamal. Okay. So, that was very easy. So, we have the 10th of Ramadan. It's Brother Rashid. 17th Ramadan, Abu Abdullah, Kashif. And the 24th is Brother Jamal. We will have subs in place. So if there are any brothers that something happens, we have subs. Okay. Now, over this biography and everything else, are there any questions over what we've covered in the biography or expectations of what's coming for the next week? Yes.
Will the book be coming next week?
Okay. Alhamdulillah, inshallah, the book should be here for next week. That's our niyyah, that it should be here for next week. We've made the order, so it should be with us, inshallah. Any other questions? No? Okay, so we will close from here. we say Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk innahu ghafurur rahim wa la ilaha illa Allah. Wassalamu alaikum.